Today, we're going to take a deep dive into one of the most incredible systems in human biology, the menstrual cycle. We're going to explore the intricate hormonal symphony that runs the whole show, and then we'll see how modern contraceptives work within that very same system.
You know, we often hear about the 28-day cycle, right? Like it's some perfect little clock. But behind the scenes, there's this incredibly complex and dynamic feedback system at play. So the real question is, how on earth does the body coordinate this incredibly precise timing, month after month? Well, let's get into it.
So here's how we're going to break it down. First up, we'll meet the key players in our hormonal symphony. Then we'll walk through the two main acts of the cycle, the follicular and luteal phases. And finally, we'll see how contraceptives manage to hack this whole system.
Okay, so to really get this, you've got to picture an orchestra. Seriously, there's a conductor, there are messengers, and there are instruments, and they're all communicating with each other through these tiny chemical signals.
It all kicks off with the conductor, the hypothalamus, right up in the brain. It sends out the orders. Those orders go to the messengers in the pituitary gland, which then tell the instruments, the ovaries, what piece to play. This whole chain of command is called the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis, or HPO axis for short, and it is the absolute core of this whole operation.
And these are the messages they're sending back and forth. The brain starts things off with GnRH. The pituitary answers with two hormones, FSH and LH. And finally, the ovaries respond by producing estrogen and progesterone. Every single one of these has a critical part to play.
So, let's do a quick flyby of the timeline. On average, it's about 28 days long. Day 1, that's the start of your period. The first half, roughly 2 weeks, is called the follicular phase. That's all leading up to the main event, ovulation, right around day 14. The second half is the luteal phase, which takes us to the end of the cycle.
All right, let's zoom in on that first half, the follicular phase. You can think of this whole phase as the preparation, the build-up to the single most important moment of the entire cycle.
So what's the point of this phase? Simple. It's all about growing and maturing a follicle inside an ovary, which is basically a tiny sac that holds an immature egg, and getting it ready for release.
Now, what's really fascinating is how these hormones all work together to make estrogen. It's this beautiful chain reaction. The hypothalamus pulses GnRH. That tells the pituitary to release FSH and LH. Then, FSH gets the follicles growing, while LH tells them to make androgens. And for the final step, FSH helps convert those androgens into estrogen. It's like this perfectly coordinated little biological factory. As those estrogen levels start to rise, it's multitasking. It's got two really critical jobs to do. First, it tells the uterine lining, the endometrium, to start thickening up, getting ready for a potential pregnancy. And second, it sends a message back to the brain, telling it to kind of calm down and produce less FSH and LH. This is called negative feedback.
Now, because there's less FSH to go around, it becomes a bit of a survival of the fittest situation for the follicles. Only one, the strongest and most developed one, can survive. This dominant follicle then takes over and becomes an absolute powerhouse, pumping out more and more estrogen all on its own.
And this is where we get to a crucial turning point. This one follicle is churning out huge amounts of estrogen, and the levels in the body are just skyrocketing. So what happens when it finally hits that critical threshold?
Well, this is where things get really cool. It completely flips the switch. Instead of telling the brain to slow down, that extremely high estrogen level does the exact opposite. It sends a positive feedback signal, basically screaming at the pituitary to release a massive, massive surge of LH. And that LH surge is the starting pistol for ovulation. It's what causes the follicle to burst and release that mature egg.
Okay, so the egg is officially on its way. The cycle now enters its second half, the luteal phase, and the focus now shifts completely from releasing an egg to preparing the uterus for a potential pregnancy.
So what about that empty follicle that got left behind? It doesn't just disappear. Nope, it gets a total makeover. It transforms into a brand new structure called the corpus luteum. You can think of it like a temporary little hormone factory with a very important new job, to start pumping out progesterone. Progesterone is the progestation hormone. It's all about getting the place ready for a potential guest. It makes the uterine lining super plush and cozy with more blood vessels. It tells glands to start producing nutrients, a welcome meal, basically. And it even creates a thick mucus plug in the cervix to protect the uterus.
Now, critically, this new combination of high progesterone and high estrogen sends a really strong stop signal back to the brain. It slams the brakes on FSH and LH production. Which makes perfect sense, right? The body's not going to start developing new follicles when it might be busy with the pregnancy.
But if fertilization doesn't happen, that corpus luteum just can't last forever. After about 10 to 12 days, it starts to break down. And when it goes, so do the progesterone and estrogen levels. They just plummet. Without that hormonal support, the uterine lining can't hold on, and it sheds. And that is menstruation, day one of a brand new cycle.
All right, so now that we've got the natural symphony down, we can finally understand how hormonal contraceptives intentionally mess with it. They're basically hacking into those very same feedback loops we've been talking about.
And really, they come in two main flavors. You have the combined method, which uses synthetic versions of both estrogen and progestin. The synthetic progestin is called a progestin. And then there's the progestin-only method, which, you guessed it, just has the progestin.
The main goal of the combined method is to stop ovulation from ever happening in the first place. By providing a steady, continuous supply of these hormones, it keeps that powerful negative feedback on the brain switched on 24/7. This suppresses FSH and LH, so a follicle never even gets the chance to mature, and that big LH surge, it never happens. No surge, no ovulation. Simple as that.
The progestin-only method, though, works a bit differently. It doesn't always stop ovulation. Instead, its primary strategy is defense. First, it works by making the cervical mucus really thick and sticky, basically creating a roadblock that sperm can't get through. And second, it tends to thin the uterine lining, making it a very difficult place for an egg to implant.
So to sum it all up, the combined method uses both estrogen and progestin to put a stop to ovulation. The progestin-only method just uses progestin, and its main job is to thicken cervical mucus to block sperm. This one is often the choice when estrogen isn't recommended, for example, during breastfeeding.
When you really step back and look at it, the menstrual cycle is a masterpiece of biological feedback and control. And by pulling back the curtain on this process, from the natural hormonal dance to the ways we can interact with it, we gain a much deeper understanding and even a sense of agency over our own bodies. Which really just leaves one question, doesn't it? What will we demystify next?